Happy Friday. Welcome to Afternoons Live with Tyler Axness. I'm Gretchen Dobervich. I'm filling in for Tyler on the Mighty 790 and 104.7 KFGO. We've got a great afternoon planned for you. While the weather is nice outside, I don't know, nice. It sounds like it's going to be a little wet out there. We're going to start talking about preparing for the cold weather, which we know is going to start blowing across the plains pretty soon. And I'm really excited. Our first guest this afternoon is Senator Rob Kupec. Who better to start with than a weatherman? So, Rob, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Or should I say Senator? My apologies.
You can just call me Rob. That works just fine.
So before we get started about talking about cold weather and preparing for it, we've got a little football action going on this weekend. I hear that you're headed to an exciting but also somewhat unusual game. Where are you headed to?
I am on my way to Brookings, South Dakota, where my University at Albany Great Danes are going to play SDSU in the semifinals for the football championship.
Woohoo! Now, how often do the Great Danes come out here to the Midwest?
They played NDSU a couple of years ago. They were like that early season blood donor game. It was very one-sided. Since then, they have gotten obviously much better, and they have never advanced this far in the playoffs. When I was at school there, they were still a Division III school, so they made the jump from 3 to 1 in the 90s.
Well, go Great Danes, and Bison heading out to Missoula this weekend, so let's hope it's a good weekend for all of us.
Yes, and then what would happen is that the Danes would meet the Bison Frisco. That would be crazy.
That would be. That would be. The Danes against the Bison. Oi, let's hope that it happens.
Absolutely. 100%. That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so as you're traveling south, is it starting to sprinkle?
It is, I can't tell if it's drizzling or just road spray. It's kind of foggy. It is kind of unusual that, I'm concerned I'm going to a football game in December. I'm concerned it might get rained on tonight. That's kind of weird.
Yeah. Also kind of weird that it's warm enough that it can rain this time of year.
Right.
Yeah, it does seem kind of, when I was, kind of picking topics of, what should we talk about on a Friday afternoon? Hey, it's North Dakota. Let's talk about the weather. And it is unseasonably warm. Thank you, El Nino, for that. But we have to start planning for the cold weather. And as those of us that born and raised or transplants to the upper Great Plains, that Arctic air starts blowing across the prairie and it gets awful cold. And we can't always plan for everything that's going to happen. And being able to heat your home and keep your electricity on is vital to surviving winters in the upper Great Plains. And I wanted to have you on this afternoon, one, to talk about the Great Danes, but also to talk about Minnesota's cold weather rule. Could you tell us what Minnesota's cold weather rule is?
Sure. It basically starts in October. It ends in the middle of April. And basically what it is if you, for whatever reason, cannot make your utility payments, the ones that keep the heat on in your house, you cannot be disconnected from your utility. So they have to keep you hooked up during that time so that you can keep the heat on, so that you can stay warm. You do have to get yourself on a payment plan. That's part of the stipulation around it. But basically the utility can't just, unplug you in the dead of winter and leave you without any heat.
Yeah, and what a great in this part of the world to have something in place like that. And hearing that, oftentimes I hear people say, well, they can't shut your power off in the winter, so at least we'll be warm. But in North Dakota, on this side of the river, we don't have anything in place that says that your utilities that keep the heat on can't be cut off. So looking to what Minnesota has done and seeing the piece that you do have to come up with some sort of a payment plan, I think is really important, because it's not that you get free heat in Minnesota. It's that you can't be cut off, but you do have to still pay for that heat during that time. So how long, do you know how long Minnesota's had this rule in place?
Yeah, I went back and I looked because I was like, it seems like it's been a long time. So it was 2007 that they put the statute in place. They made a few revisions, but nobody's really touched anything on that statute in a few years. And it is, no matter what your income level is, they can't cut you off. But if you are below 50% of the median average income in Minnesota, then there are certain other stipulations that kick in. But basically, anybody that goes on this, you do have to come up with a plan to pay it off.
That's really nice to hear that there aren't income guidelines for it, because life is so unpredictable. You could have an illness, you could lose your job, natural disaster. I mean, there's so many things that can happen that even if you've been able to pay for the heat, to keep the lights on, keep things going, life is just unpredictable. So kudos to whoever put that in, that it isn't based on your income, it's based on your need.
Right, because the other thing is you could have a fairly decent income, but we know a lot of middle-class people that are still, even though they're middle class, they're living paycheck to paycheck, and you are just one terrible accident, terrible diagnosis away from maybe not having any income coming in very quickly.
Absolutely. And it always seems to, those things happen at a time when you've probably got other things going on as well. And so what a great peace of mind for the people of Minnesota to know that, yep, I'm going to have to pay for it, but at least in the middle of the crisis, I don't have to.
Right. And then hopefully, whatever the crisis is, you get over it, you're back on your feet, and you can work out some kind of delayed payment plan, through the summer where the utility bills traditionally aren't as high.
And this program, you said that it's pretty much started, went into law, nobody's really touched it, supported by the utility companies in the sense of they support the idea of we don't want any of our friends, family, neighbors to be out in the cold in Minnesota as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know when it went in. I can imagine there might have been some consternation in 2007, just knowing how, after 1 year in the legislature, seeing how that all worked. But for the most part, it seems like it's worked pretty well. And the utilities, there is a requirement too that in the fall they have to send out a little notice, either electronically and on your bill, just to say, hey, just remember this is in place. The cold weather rule kicks in, and we can't shut your utilities off.
Wonderful. A little bit later on the show, we're going to have someone from West Central Community Action's Energy Assistance Program on to talk about, for those folks that it took advantage of. Took advantage is probably not a good word to use, but utilized Minnesota's cold weather rule to make it through the winter with their heat on, but then after winter find themselves maybe a little short on being able to make those back payments. What kind of assistance is available to eligible folks?
Yeah, and and the other thing we're looking at is ways to help people winterize their houses, to help them reduce their utility bill so that maybe they won't be so reliant on this. And particularly, people who live in mobile homes, in the winter, those can be really tough to insulate. Some of the older models in particular are not in great shape, not, equipped to handle what comes our way in the winter. So I know that's, one of the other housing areas that we're looking at of trying to help people out.
Yeah, and that struggle is real. My husband and I, we live in a house that's older than both of us, and on really cold nights, especially when it's windy, the windows need to be replaced, and so even when you're in a home, you're not completely protected from winter unless you've completely winterized your home.
Yeah, so I have an old house of the previous owner. Back in the 1980s, blew insulation into the walls, and every winter I give him a little thank you for doing that.
God bless good homeowners. Rob, we're going to keep you on, and we're going to go to a break now. Welcome back to Afternoons Live with Tyler Axness. I'm Gretchen Dobervich, filling in for Tyler on the Mighty 790 and 104.7 KFGO. If you want to join us this afternoon in our conversation, you can call us on the studio line at 701-237-5948, sponsored by Laney's, or you can text us at the KFGO Text Club at 35270. And the discussion this afternoon is preparing for the cold. It's warm enough that it's starting to sprinkle and drizzle a little bit out there, which is unusual for this time of year, but we all know what's coming down the road. And so we're talking this afternoon about how to prepare, particularly in emergencies for when it gets cold out. And our first guest, Senator Rob Kupec, is joining us this afternoon. And we're talking about Minnesota's cold weather rule. And there's this kind of pervasive myth that I've heard for many years that your power can't be shut off, your heat can't be shut off during the winter. And that is not actually the case everywhere in the United States. But Minnesota, their legislature back in, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, 07, 08?
Yeah, 07, I think.
07 said, you know what, it gets real cold here, and we're going to keep people in heat to make it through the winters in Minnesota, and we're going to put a rule in place that your power can't be shut off if it powers your heat during the winter. And it doesn't mean you don't have to pay for it. You still have to pay for it. You have to enter into a payment plan with your provider. But it does mean that you're not going to freeze. Kids aren't going to freeze. Pets aren't going to freeze. You're going to keep warm during the winter. And so, Rob, how does that play out for folks in terms of there's this rule in place? We are going to have folks from programs talk about it, but is it something through the state? Do they work with their providers? We'll have somebody talk about those details, but just from like a 3,000-foot level, what does that look like for residents of Minnesota?
Sure. The way I understand it is that, the provider of the utility, when somebody is behind, will actually still give them basically, a cutoff notice. And if they get that cutoff notice, they can then, contact the utility and invoke this cold winter rule to say I can't get cut off. If by chance they did not take that step, the utility must, and then they cut them off. The utility must turn it back on within 24 hours if they get notified by the person that, hey, I qualify for this. Here's why I can't pay my utility bill, and turn it back on. So it's not an automatic that they won't cut you off. But they have to give you notification, and then if you invoke, the cold weather rule, then they have to work with you to make a payment plan.
All right, thanks for that information. So we're getting down to the end of this segment. So you okay if we switch back to a little football?
Sure.
So what's your prediction for the game? How the Great Dane's going to do?
They have surprised me at every moment. I watched the game last week on TV in Idaho, and I thought, wow, they've done so well. But Idaho is, a formidable opponent. And they were behind a lot of the game in Idaho, and then came back and held them off. So they've got a quarterback who can really fling it. I mean, he made some really long, very precision passes that I was quite amazed at. I'm like, wow. So, I don't know. I don't have any illusions. I'm going in, SDSU is a really good football team. My hope is we just stay competitive and have a good game.
Yeah, Bison, we found out what a great football team they've got this year, but really hoping that the Great Danes and the Bisons are going to be playing each other at the next game down in Frisco, where I don't think they really ever have to worry about cold weather down there like we do.
Yes and no. I mean, it can get cold around the Dallas area. Not North Dakota, Minnesota cold, but it gets cold. And the other thing is, a lot of their infrastructure, as we know from when they had that cold outbreak down there, they are not set up to handle it.
No.
So those times when it does get cold, they're not ready.
No, absolutely they are not. Well, thank you, Senator Kupec, so much for joining us this afternoon on Afternoons Live and talking cold weather preparedness with me. Good luck to you and your Great Danes. And we're going to go to a break now.